All right, welcome to Thoughts of War. My name is Bart. In this particular set of video, I'm covering Irenaeus. I'm actually going to do a part 1 and a part 2 of Irenaeus, and we're covering early Christianity and nonviolence. Now, if you've not seen my first video in this series, my first 2 videos, it's covering Justin Martyr. So if I would recommend that you go back and watch part 1 and part 2 of Justin Martyr. Now, Irenaeus has a few interesting things about him. One of his most famous works is against heresies. He's just mainly trying to confront all the different heresies that are coming up, and he's trying to, in a sense, put them all down and explaining what is wrong with all these different heresies, why it was not what the apostles taught. So one of the things that he could say would be like, one, we know that you're teaching a heresy because we know what the apostles believed. How do we know what the apostles believed? Well, he actually includes a list of bishops going all the way from Peter to the current bishop at the time. And the current bishop at the time, and I'm going to mess up his name, Eleutherius, lived between 174 and 189. Actually, that's when he was a bishop of Rome, was between 174 and 189. He actually was much older than that, of course, but he died in 189. So another thing that was interesting about this particular section is it also mentions that Irenaeus actually met Polycarp when he was much younger. And so what's interesting about Polycarp was Polycarp actually was instructed by the apostles. And so one thing that's neat about that is he actually met the apostle John. And so we also learn in this section that John remained among the church in Asia up until the reign of Trajan. And he was the emperor between 98 and 117. So John lived to be a very old age, and Polycarp lived to be a very old age. And so that means Irenaeus knew somebody that knew Jesus, so personally while he walked on this earth. So that's pretty neat. And what's also neat about that is that Irenaeus can also say, do you want to know what the apostles taught? You can go to those churches in Asia, and guess what? They were discipled for decades by a man named Polycarp. And Polycarp, was someone who actually, instructed by the apostles themselves. So those churches in Asia, there was a lot of Christians who could say, hey, we know what the apostles taught because, we have almost direct links to them. And so just something that's just interesting. And, I used to think this was kind of strange just looking at that. But I remember the older men in my church growing up would say that they remembered, now this is when I was young, but they remembered Civil War vets getting together back when they were young. And so it's kind of interesting. This, the Civil War looks like it's so far back, but it's really not as far back as you may think. And it's the same thing here. Although we're talking about Irenaeus writing between that 174 and 189 time period, he still, knew somebody that actually walked with Jesus. So I know Against Heresies is kind of the main work of Irenaeus, but we're going to jump into apostolic preaching. And we're going to jump straight into 61. Now, to make sense of 61, you have to go back to 59. So 59 kind of begins his thought process that leads you to this. Now, this is very much like Justin Martyr's writings to his first apology and also Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho, and that he's covering these prophecies pertaining to Jesus and how they were fulfilled in the New Testament. So, but the difference is, here Irenaeus is actually referring to Isaiah chapter 11, not Isaiah chapter 2. So if you jump into Isaiah chapter 11, in verse 6, it says, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf, the young lion, the fat calf will be together, and a child will lead them. The cow and the bear will graze, and the young ones will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like cattle. An infant will play beside the cobra's pit, and a toddler will put his hand into a snake's den that will not harm or destroy each other. So you have to keep that in mind. That's the verses that he's talking about, that he's explaining in 61. Now, he already explained in the rest of 59 and in 60 those first few verses in Isaiah chapter 11. So now we're talking about this weird mixture of animals. These animals should be killing one another, but instead they're sleeping beside one another, and there's no longer fear. So now this is what Irenaeus says about that. And so now it says, now as to the union and concord and peace of the animals of different kinds, which by nature are opposed and hostile to each other. Now let me stop. I'll go ahead and say the same thing about Isaiah chapter 11 as was taught about Isaiah chapter 2. This is something that's going to happen in the millennial reign. So when actually Jesus comes back, the animals will actually be nice to one another. They will no longer kill one another. This is something that's happening in the future. This isn't something that's going to happen now. This is something that is in the future. But if we look here, look what he says. He says, "For already in a symbol he announces the gathering together in peace and concord through the name of Christ of men of unlike races and yet of like dispositions." So Christ is already putting people together that usually should not go together. These are people who should be killing one another. And some of these are the weak people. Some of these are the strong people. What I mean is, just like these animals, you had some that were lambs, some that were lions. A lion should be killing a lamb. But here's what he's saying is that Christ has already fulfilled this, and that now, attending some of these churches, you have those that should be the ones killing, and the ones that should be being killed actually sitting together in services and worshiping God together. This is something that has already been fulfilled. This is not something that's going to be in the future. This is something that's happening now. And so for sure, this tells us about whenever we as believers come to Christ, whenever someone in another country, another race, it doesn't matter about the race. It doesn't matter if they're from Africa. It doesn't matter if they're from Australia. It doesn't matter if they're from it's just anywhere in the world, Europe, Asia, South America. It doesn't matter, North America. It doesn't matter where they're from, what part of those continents they're from. None of that matters. Once someone comes to know Christ, then I am at peace with them. I no longer go to war with them. If I still went to war with them, that would make me just like the way the rest of the world functions. But now that we're in Christ, that no longer happens, and Irenaeus points that out. So Christians no longer war with, especially in this particular section, no longer war with those that are within the faith. So if you see there's Isaiah 11, 6 through 8. I just mentioned that's what he's referencing. So if you want to go back, it'll be good to read those verses. But you notice it says, so much of that some of them were like wolves and lions, ravaging on the weaker and warring on their equals. So Irenaeus is just pointing out that some of these a lion just doesn't kill lambs, but lions will go and fight maybe other lions for territory or whatever particular reason. And so, but it says, but now coming together in one name, they have acquired righteous habits by the grace of God, changing their wild and untamed nature, and this has come to pass already. So now, this is going to be kind of an interesting question. Did he make the lion like the lamb, or the lamb like a lion? If you think about it, he took those that were warring, those animals like the wolves and lions, he made them like lambs. He took away their desire to kill and made it to where they could be like a lamb, where they could sit there and not, harm the others that are around them. And so I just want to throw that out there. This is kind of interesting. So going back to Justin Martyr, when he's talking about Isaiah chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, about turning your swords into plowshares, here we're kind of dealing the same thing. The lions and wolves are like those that are bearing swords. And he's basically taken them, and they're now formed plowshares. So notice, this has come to pass already. This isn't something that's going to take place in the future. This is a change in the life of a Christian now. And so just a quick summary on Irenaeus is, one, he was directly linked to the apostles, which was pretty cool. And then two, like Justin Martyr, he referenced partial fulfillment in prophecy based on the change of behavior between the races that follow God. So it's very similar in that there's prophecies in Isaiah that point to a future time. And in that future time, people will get along. But this isn't just something that's going to happen in the millennium reign. This is something that is happening now to those who follow Christ. So come back to my part 2 video and we'll finish it up.